from The Athletic. I'm not telling you. We've talked about the alien thing.
We can talk about Bigfoot, or we can talk about jacked punters. Your call.
I mean, we've talked about aliens. I told you I do believe aliens exist, except I'm skeptical at times with some of the stuff. The Bigfoot thing, I always have called complete BS on. Nate Taylor, what do you think? Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Look, maybe the legend can't grow if it's in clear 4K, right? I mean, so everybody put their phones down real quick. But, of course I don't believe in it as much as it is fun to talk about.
It's funny. It is.
But no, I'm more in the line of, okay, I haven't seen fans celebrate like this when their team wins the Super Bowl, let alone when their team ties the game in October.
Yeah, we were just talking about that.
Sure, yeah, I heard. So I was like,
yeah,
sure, I could.
They're a wealthy couple. They're a wealthy couple. It turns out Pelissero said they're just a wealthy couple. Obviously, they rent multiple
There
cabanas.
just happens to be a wealthy LA couple who spends their life watching the Chargers. What life is that? What kind of life is that? That was a game last night of the two most cursed franchises of the last 20 years. Not the worst franchises, most cursed. They'll win some games. They might find themselves in a playoff game or two. They'll lose.
Man.
It'll hurt. They'll never be bad enough to get the #1 overall pick and just solve their problems. Just be stuck in mediocrity forever.
The beyond the lady and her wave of emotions.
She was into it.
Was the idea that, like, okay, we're moving, we got the ball, all we need is a field goal. It's a 2-minute warning. All right, what play do we like? Okay, let's find the play. Let's get the right formation, the right personnel. Okay. Whoa, we didn't account for that number 11 guy.
It was quiet all game.
What just happened?
All game quiet, and they did a good job on him. And then when it mattered most, he stepped up.
They could have called the game right there, like, it's over. They're not scoring. Like, for Justin Herbert's own safety, let's call it, But I mean, that is the mark of a team that is not good or not thorough.
They're poorly coached, Nate. That's
really
what it is. Like,
they really
I get it. People are hating on Herbert today, and look, we might find out in a year or so when Herbert's got a different head coach that he's the same guy, and maybe he's just a more athletically gifted Phillip Rivers. Maybe that'll be the case. I don't know.
Okay.
But right now, I still think it's the coach holding him back.
I mean, Phillip Rivers made it to an AFC championship game.
Yeah.
On like one knee.
No, he's not a bum. No, not at all.
Yeah.
Phillip Rivers, I don't open up Pandora's box here, but Phillip Rivers might still find a way in the Hall of Fame one day, as nuts as that sounds.
I think Phillip Rivers should be in the Hall of Fame.
Okay, well, there you go.
I mean, this is a passing league, and he's got the longevity, the consistency. It's tough. It's almost like the 90s era of the NBA, where you can just lay off a number of guys who were great at one point in time.
Lost to Jordan.
Yes, and for any AFC quarterback not named Ben Roethlisberger or Peyton Manning, you lost to Tom Brady. So I think of that era, like there are 4 legitimate Hall of Famers, all the guys I just mentioned. So, and he did it with the Chargers. I mean, if Dan Fouts is in the Hall of Fame, then
we can argue maybe Joe Namath. Well, look, we can go through
Phillip
some stats.
Rivers definitely needs to be in the Hall of Fame.
I do only like doing that when I think a player who has a borderline Hall of Fame case, and I want to make it stronger. I'm like, Jerome Bettis is a Hall of Famer, but Jamal Charles isn't. Get the hell out of here! Jerome Bettis didn't even average 4 yards a carry. The man couldn't get to 4.
Yeah.
He's sitting here like 3.8.
But he had a fun nickname, and he played for the Steelers.
Yeah,
and they did win. And they did win. So look, there's a case to be made about. But see, he was one of the most lovable guys in that era. I mean, it's weird that this is how cool the 90s were in NFL history.
I told you I opened Pandora's box.
Of course you did. They played the same position, y'all. Barry Sanders, Jerome Bettis, Christian Okoye, Marcus Allen. They all played the same position. You don't have that now. You don't have that level of variety in terms of play style, body type in this current NFL. But yeah, I mean, he scored a lot of touchdowns from the 2-yard line. So Hall of Famer.
Okay, so before we get to real things concerning the Chiefs, my current working theory is the Chiefs are only allowed to call the fake field goals where Tommy Townsend is the push man is if he gets super jacked. I want him to be like the size of the Pittsburgh Steelers punter Or like Steve Weatherford, we've decided in the 2010s, you got to get jacked like real big if they're going to call that play.
Like we need to start looking at the top of your locker when we interview you.
Yeah.
Hey, what kind of supplements you taking
What
out
kind of
here?
hands row you got there?
Yeah. I mean, all these home runs are fantastic, but what's up there? What's funny to me is like we know Tommy Townsend for like his arm strength and his accuracy. Like he's better passing the football than he is blocking or pushing for someone. Of course, he was also on the injury report, which was hilarious at the time. They should never, ever
run that play.
Run that play again. Like, don't do it.
2 yards. They needed 2 yards.
Yeah, it wasn't like 4th and inches.
No.
Right.
Besides the fact that you took Mahomes off the field, you also needed 2 yards. So it was an absolute disaster there. Fortunately, they obviously still were able to win the football game, and they're sitting at 5-1. And we were talking about the schedule opening up a little bit, Nate. Like suddenly they have like the 22nd easiest schedule or difficult schedule
based
in
on
football,
win percentage.
based off of strength schedule win percentage. You know, a lot of it, they were 18th before the Chargers lost last night. Now they're 22nd because the Chargers are below 500.
Right.
But you're just looking at that and who they're going up against for the number 1 seed, Nate. And Miami's a team, Jacksonville, Buffalo. Those are really the only other teams you think can maybe get the number 1 seed probably. And Miami has the 5th most difficult schedule remaining.
Because of their own division. Their
Right.
division
And because
is
they have
actually
to play the Chiefs just like the Chiefs had to play them.
Yes, and their division is actually legitimate.
Except for the Patriots.
Yeah. They're not going to fire him, right?
I think they might part ways at the end of the season.
This is a smart man right here.
Yeah, they wouldn't. They'd never publicly fire.
No chance he's ever getting fired.
You can't fire. I mean,
they just do the like. Bill has decided to pursue other opportunities.
Again,
and then someone should hire him and just be like, "Hey, don't be the GM. Just come in here and coach.
Right,
be fine."
Another part of '90s era football in the NFL, Don Shula was on one of those like rolling like shopping carts on the sideline, and they couldn't fire him. So you can't fire Bill Belichick, right?
Nope.
I mean, he had his own golf cart during a playoff game. You know how fantastic you gotta be at your job to be like, I don't even need my legs. Just roll me up here on the sideline and I'll call some plays for Dan Marino and the boys. They can't fire him. But to the schedule, like I think the Chiefs will win against the Chargers on Sunday. Chargers coming off a short week, tough loss. Having to travel. Yep, coming off their bye week. They got some injury issues as well. Their offensive line, as we saw yesterday, a little tough. So I'm very fascinated to see how Charles Omenihu coming off suspension, how many snaps he gets, particularly in those third down situations, if he can make an impact in his first appearance in a Chiefs uniform. But everything is sort of leading us to the NFL's most hyped and anticipated game not being on American soil.
Yep.
And I'm glad that I'll be going.
They're gonna take our Super Bowl too, Nate. They're gonna take our Super Bowl. They're gonna move it
He's
over to
real
London.
worried about
moving it to London.
Yeah, move that
He's
Super Bowl
really
to
worried
London.
about him floating that London
I don't like
Super
that at
Bowl
all.
idea.
Roger Goodell brought that up.
If you fly the teams out 10 days beforehand, it gets really interesting. I mean,
He doesn't want 1:30. He's
I won't-
anti-brunch.
I won't be opposed. Yeah, when can they
1:30
play that?
kickoff,
When can they
Nate.
play this game?
No, 1:30 kickoff.
No, how about we're gonna play it at midnight? That's that way.
Midnight in London.
They'll
That
show
way
up
we
in
still
London.
get the London
Yeah,
crowd.
they'll
but we
still show up
also-
in London.
Yeah. What if we play this game at midnight?
Could you imagine traveling to cover your team for
game
that?
of the season.
And you're like, it's just like midnight. You're like, whoa. Well, talk about how many excuses to come out of that game. There'd be no end.
But it sounds like you think that Dolphins-Chiefs game decides the number 1 seed?
It will be the first. It'll be the first checkpoint. I think the first domino. I guess probably is the better comparison because I think both teams will probably get to that game with one loss. Now I know the Dolphins have the Eagles coming up in Philadelphia
This week, yeah.
Have you seen the Eagles defense? It's not the same dominant unit as it was last year.
No, they're a touch off, but they're a lot like I put them in the Chiefs category. They're a touch off and they're a touch off and they're still 5-1. Like they aren't running at 100%. They're just out here rolling out 80% games, a lot like the Chiefs in some of these games. They're just rolling out these 80% games and they're still 5-1. It's not slowing them down exactly.
Right. I think the thing that concerns me if you're an Eagles fan or if you're just watching them on the All 22 from time to time is the Chiefs sort of showed you how to go down the field in the second half of the Super Bowl last year, which is quick passes, quick decisions, having a person who can win off the line of scrimmage very quickly. That was Travis Kelce at the time. Even Juju Smith-Schuster obviously played really well in the second half of the Super Bowl. So with all that motion, with all that amount of speed, with the idea that Tua Tagovailoa gets the ball out almost as fast as anybody in the league, there's a way for the Dolphins in prime time to kind of have a surprising performance where it sort of reestablishes their legitimacy in the AFC. Obviously, we saw what they did to the Patriots in that Sunday night game. So I think there's a similar chance where the Eagles are going to be the team that's going to have to like stay with the Dolphins, even though we have a much larger sample size of the Eagles being the better team over the course of, the last 2 years.
When we look at the sleepwalking of the Chiefs, I think the obvious thing is wide receiver. It was the biggest offseason conversation. It's going to remain one of the biggest conversations this year.
Mm-hmm.
We can no longer think there's some hidden potential in Sky Moore, right? We're done with that. That man's got more than enough opportunities. Look, MVS is worse. I told Gold last week, MVS is just out there like closing his apple rings. He's just getting cardio. He's just going for a jog. He's not doing anything else but going for a leisurely, stroll through the park. And Sky is bordering on that too. The amount of routes he runs compared to how many balls are thrown his way is way too low to think that there's some secret coming where he's going to snap out of it.
Right. It seems to me that Sky Moore, more than likely, and look, they made the thing about the Chiefs coaching staff is that they made pivotal decisions at the right points last year, right? They made the decision 6 weeks in, kind of where we are now. All right, let's give Isaiah Pacheco the starting role, okay? They made the decision like, all right, well, we're a good offense. We're an explosive offense. We need to add another dynamic playmaker, that being Kadarius Toney, of course, at the trade deadline. So the coaching staff in the front office have worked hand in hand really well over the last several years. Gentlemen, Sky Moore needs to be a slot receiver.
Yeah.
He can win occasionally on the outside. I know people are referencing his catch late in the game on Thursday night against the Denver Broncos. It was good. It was a good route. It's the one route he ran really well from the outside. Another adjustment that I would recommend is Sky Moore does not get open quickly enough unless it's in the slot, but that area is going more to Rashee Rice at the moment. Then Sky Moore should be not on the field as much in the red zone. Part of the Chiefs' red zone issue is the fact that, they're not giving Marquez Valdes-Scantling chances in one-on-one opportunities. Obviously, you have the best red zone weapon of all time in Travis Kelce, so he dominates a lot of things. Rashee Rice is benefiting off of that and being, obviously reliable. But every time I see Sky Moore in the red zone, it just hasn't been like productive.
I mean, he has one touchdown in 22 career games now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
and that one touchdown was
two, because he had one in the Super Bowl and he had one week 1 or 2 this year.
Week 2 against the Jaguars. And you have to remember that was in a 2-minute drill, so it's a little bit different than like your normal red zone context. I know people have said, "Well, hey, if Justin Ross is dressing, where is he?" And my simplified, again, recommendation for a solution is those Sky Moore snaps in the red zone probably need to go to Justin Ross, because at least he gives you
bigger target,
the leapability and the one-on-one matchups. And look, they're going to create perhaps the same amount of separation, but one guy is clearly more athletic and can clearly, I think win a 50-50 pass more than Sky Moore.
Do you think Jerick McKinnon can help in the red zone? And that was something we were alluding to earlier. I know maybe we talked, are they saving him and all that? But in the red zone, if you're asking outside of the wide receiver room in-house to help you, Jerick McKinnon seems like maybe part of this solution as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Are they saving him?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it feels like they're just like, we'll use you starting about week 10, Jerick. See you then.
Yeah. One of my favorite things has been, because what you're starting to notice now, and I think he's gotten a lot better, is there was a few times in the Broncos game where the Broncos are giving off a delayed rush or, a simulated pressure look, and you're not really sure who's coming where. And so it's a lot of mental quickness and strong decision-making from, like, what are my rules as a running back? Isaiah Pacheco did a really good job in pass protection. So they're using this first half of the season to sort of ensure that he progresses in that area just as much as he's been, reliable as a running back. You could also add, too, that, like, why don't you just run the ball on first and second down in the red zone, because that guy usually doesn't go down on first contact. So
and if there's anybody who's going to get it in from, like, the 9, it's probably Mahomes.
Yeah.
I'll take the risk.
Yeah. So you can, again, there's several things that they could try against the Chargers on Sunday. But with everything that's been said about McKinnon, one of my favorite parts of the season has been McKinnon looks at me in the locker room and he's like, Nate, don't ask this question because I don't want to lie to you. I got a lot of you. And then, like, by the third question, he was like, kind of like last year. And then, like, he just stopped.
They're keeping
Kind
them
of like
fresh.
last year. And
Keeping them fresh.
and I was like,
Okay.
this is
So-
He
this
just
is,
had
this
to
is
stay
my
in the cold tub until, like, week 10 or 11.
So
This is
really,
my part of the job, Jarek.
Dolphins game will be the first time that we see maybe a little more of McKinnon. Maybe that's what, week 9.
yes. And you have the bye week following, right?
Right.
Coming off of that game. So you can really everything's sort of leading towards that moment. I know it's strange because you're playing 3 divisional games, which are more important than the Miami game. But to see the offense and to know that, like, that's the game right after the trade deadline too, right? So the trade deadline is October 31st. They play the Dolphins the very next week. So everything's sort of leading up to this, like, again, pivotal moment of the season. And you can beat the Chargers by just playing sound assignment football. Go to Denver, have a nice time, don't make it interesting in the fourth quarter. Then we get our game plan really ready and set to go for the Dolphins.
We're talking to Nate Taylor from The Athletic. Thinking of Denver, we know they cut Frank Clark on Saturday. He's a free agent now. Andy the other day spoke and kind of said
They've clearly
they're talking
Oh.
through. When I heard that, I took that as we're making sure Frank's okay with the role that we're going to present to him. I'm not
Yes.
worried about the finances, but is Frank good with being a 10-snap guy, maybe even a practice squad guy? What are you hearing?
All of that checks out to me as well. I'm going to look up here just to make sure I'm on over the cap right now. The Chiefs have about $3 million to use. If you give Frank, the veterans minimum, you'd still have around 2.5 to play with. There's a chance that you could make a trade, but obviously if you add, I just want to remind people, if you add Frank, that could, complicate what you could do at the trade deadline to some degree, because obviously you have to have the cap space.
But wouldn't you just at the trade deadline be looking for a different defensive lineman anyway? Like, what? I mean, are they really going to go for a wide receiver? Because I don't think they'll target.
I don't. Yeah, there's
surprised,
not a great wide receiver.
Unless it's Hollywood Brown.
Yeah, there's no Kadarius Toney out there, at least as of right now, from what I'm hearing. So, and of course, his issue was injuries, and he didn't want to be there. So, there's no player right now, at least that's on the trade block that sort of fits that same, category. So the trade deadline will mostly be about offense, I think, more so than defense, because you have Charles Omenihu coming back from suspension. You obviously are having conversations with Frank Clark. It's just one of those things where, for Frank, he has made it abundantly clear to most people in the league that, like, this is where I would like to be. I know where this team is headed. I've been there before. I've helped them before. Let me get one last chance to be with Chris Jones, and obviously to help out all the young guys. I mean, he did that role better than anybody could have anticipated last year, being the savvy veteran who sort of gives lessons along the way to a younger defense and actually helps that defense be ready when the moment is obviously its brightest in the postseason. So you can sort of sign him and stash him away. You can sort of give him to the you can sign him to a practice squad that you can obviously elevate him. There also is a benefit if you add Frank, because he obviously knows the system. If there's an injury at the defensive line position, he would be the most logical, most seamless transition to somebody if you want to keep your rotational numbers correct, or if you want to have the best amount of guys possible. It's better to have Frank Clark than it is to have maybe somebody else who is either on the trade block or still available in free agency.
Yeah, because Carlos Dunlap was the name we all talked about during camp. I don't know if he's like semi-retired, just whatever. He's hanging out at home too.
He's just, I think the thing for Carlos is he wondered if other teams would be, potentially calling. There hasn't been a ton of injuries at the defensive line position this year, which I find to be interesting too. So it's like, hey, Von Miller's coming back from his injury, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that was sooner than we anticipated. Maybe Buffalo doesn't give me a call. Buffalo doesn't have a lot of cap space either right now. But for all these teams, it's like, I mean, it's crazy that like the Bengals are the team that is probably most capable of adding somebody. They have about $12 million to spend.
They're trying to save that money to pay.
But if you're Frank, are you joining?
Yeah,
you're
you
not
can
for
roll
sure,
over that money for next year, right?
You're not sure if Frank, if you're Frank Clark who wants to be on a contender at this second, the Bengals are just a 500 team. You're not sure.
Right.
You don't want to join another team that's not going to make the playoffs.
And Carlos doesn't have great feelings about the Bengals.
Gotcha.
Obviously. So, like the Browns have $34 million if somebody wants to join them. If you want to give it another week or two and see how that season plays along. They're probably the best contender who has the most money in the AFC. The 49ers know what their defensive line situation is. You don't have to worry about them. And so the further you go out, the more you realize, like, man, there's not just – sometimes it works out for a veteran where you're like the league kind of informs you little by little by little that, like, all right, my career may be done, which was one of the more fascinating parts about the Kelsey documentary on Amazon was when Jason Kelsey was talking to all of his former teammates for the Eagles who have all been retired, and they're like, no, the league will let you know. And then I think it was Jason Avant who said, well, they called me, and then I thought about it. And that's not a good thing. It's not like you're, like, jumping at the opportunity. You're thinking about, like, oh, okay. So I don't know if Carlos is in that category, too, where, like, if a team does approach him, is he more thinking about?
And then he's like, it's probably it.
And Avant's...
Didn't Avant quit in the middle of preseason or like training camp?
I can't remember.
Was he one of those like signing training camp and he's like, I'm out?
Yeah, I'd have to look back here.
That's what I mean. John Ross just did that during this year's camp.
Yes, he was just like, how many routes I got to run? No.
Yeah. He got to a Chiefs training camp. He's like,
nope. And that was before they put the pads on. Which is
John
crazy.
was like, I'm out, man. I'm done.
So Avant's point was when you have to start thinking about it, you're already retired. You're just not willing to admit it to yourself and to everybody else. So I don't know if Carlos is in that spot as well. But for Frank, this is the best opportunity for him. And, Mike Dana's playing pretty well, pretty serviceable. Obviously, George Karlaftis is having a lot more pressures this earlier in the season than he did last year as a rookie. You still got to see what you've invested in Charles Omenihu, right? But Malik Herring or Frank Clark, that's kind of, I know people have said, well, what about Felix? Red shirt. Just don't even look at him, guys. It's a red shirt year. He's only there to learn. Like, if they have to use him, it's a problem. Like, Felix is
a project.
Yeah, well, not even a project. He's just he's like one of the youngest players on the team who obviously has talent for next season.
Okay.
Like, they've actually taken his snap count down, which lends you to believe that, like, no, we're trying to win. And so we'll give you snaps if it's
games in hand.
Yeah, if it's advantageous for the situation. But, like, Frank Clark is the now, you're the future, in a sense. And that's the same way for Malik Herring, too.
Nate Taylor from The Athletic. Good to have you in studio, man. Appreciate it as always. We'll be checking out your work this week over at The Athletic.